Welcome to the Parkland Report. My name is Seamus Riley. Joining me today, Sybil Phillips, Chief Pilot at the Institute of Aviation at Parkland College, and Jim Warren, a flight instructor. Welcome to the Parkland Report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so tell me, what is the Institute of Aviation and where is it?
The Institute of Aviation is at Willard Airport, and we started actually in 1946 with the University of Illinois. We were there until just this past August, and at that time the Institute transitioned to Parkland College. So we've been training pilots, more than 14,000 of them, since 1946.
Long tradition, a long history of flight instruction.
Yes.
How did they end up in Champaign to begin with?
Well, it was post-World War II, and there was seen as a need for pilots coming out of that time. Aviation was kind of booming, and the university saw a need to train pilots, and they were given the land to make the airport, and as part of that, there was supposed to be a training facility associated with it, so that's how we came to be.
How long have you been associated with the Institute?
I started flying at the Institute in 1983, and I started working there in 1986, so it's been 30-ish years.
Jim, how long have you been at the Institute?
I started flying in 2011, and I started instructing in August of 2013.
So what was it about flying that interested you? How did you get into it?
I would say that it's the freedom more than anything, and it's challenging. It requires some mental capacity, and there's a lot of things that you have to pay attention to, and that fits my personality. I'm kind of an A type. I don't want to say I'm an adrenaline junkie, but I like to be involved and you know, challenge myself, and there's plenty of that in aviation, and it fits my personality really well.
Now, did you connect because you were a student at the University of Illinois, and if you were a student, what were you studying there?
Well, originally I did go to U of I, and I was a chemical engineering major, and I quickly figured out that I didn't want that much physics and calculus in my life, and I was a military veteran. I was in the Army beforehand, and the training curriculum we have at the Institute is based off of Army training manuals and Air Force field manuals, so it transitioned to my style of learning very easily, and I took to it really well, and I really enjoyed it.
So you went from being a student to a flight instructor. What's the pathway for that? And tell me a little bit about why the Institute operates that way.
Well, essentially, we create our own instructors when you come all the way through the program. And if you internalize the way we do things, you become a very good instructor by the time you come all the way through the program. We have a myriad of courses from private pilot all the way up to multi-engine instructor, and you can really get a good sense of how to teach. You get an array of instructors teaching you, it exposes you to different styles, and when you make it all the way through, you come out a very well-rounded pilot.
So Sybil, tell me about the different types of aviation training that the Institute focuses on.
Well, we start at the beginning. You get a private pilot certificate, and that allows you to take passengers. You can fly anywhere in the United States. You can fly at night. And then after that, the next level of training is for an instrument rating. And basically what an instrument rating allows you to do is to fly in the clouds. It makes you a lot safer pilot because you just get to use the airplane more. And on days where the weather's kind of marginal, you can really safely operate better with an instrument rating. The next step is a commercial pilot. And a lot of people ask us, like, when are you going to be a commercial pilot? Well, I am a commercial pilot. I had to be one before I became an instructor. But I think what they ask a lot of times, that they're talking about, when are you going to be an airline pilot? And one of the steps for that is to become a commercial pilot. There's a series of training events that you have to go through and testing, and that allows you to be paid to fly. And there are many different jobs you can get flying an airplane. The next step is a flight instructor, and in the aviation industry, the flight instructors are usually the newest pilots, because when you're a flight instructor, and if I'm your instructor and we're flying together, I get to log the time that you're flying. And so that allows me to build experience in my own logbook and build experience toward whatever the next job is that I want to get. So we have different types of instructors. We have flight instructors who just teach basic aircraft operations, and then you need another certification to teach instrument flight operations, and then yet another certification to teach in a multi-engine airplane, which is basically any airplane that has more than one engine.
So for a person starting off, is it fair to say that there is a certain level of sort of mechanical sort of learning? In other words, you have to sort of learn how the plane operates to get it off the ground. So it's a practice piece. It's a lot of repetition of things. How long does that part take?
Well, our private pilot curriculum is 2 semesters. In the first semester, the goal is safe solo flight. And when we tell students that, they are like, what? I'm going to fly by myself the first semester? And yes, that is the goal. And by the time they get there, they'll have all the knowledge, all the skills, all the abilities that they need to be able to do that. And we do practice. We have many different skills that have to be learned prior to that lay the foundation for landing practice. And then once the students have those skills, the instructor actually endorses their logbook and puts their name on the line and says, you know, this student is proficient to go solo. So we make sure that they're ready before they go.
So Jim, other than the mechanical, learning how to operate something that's basically a mechanical sort of object, albeit moving very, very swiftly,
right.
When you get beyond that mechanical sort of piece, you get into the operational piece, and there are things about flying an airplane, I imagine, that are different about operating another mechanical piece of equipment, like, for example, knowing where you are at all times.
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about how that instrument piece and how that connects with pilots having to learn to understand
Yes.
geographically, spatially where they are?
Absolutely. We call it situational awareness. That is one of the skills that you have to learn, and it is a skill. If you don't have the requisite ability, we can teach you. I mean, that's what instructors do. It's all verbal coaching. And it takes some experience and exposure, and you have to be put in situations, and it usually helps if you get lost a couple times. The instructor knows where you are, but
Right.
for the student, it's good to kind of get lost and learn what skills you need to have and how to maintain situational awareness while you're moving around. And it starts very basic with cardinal directions. If we went north away from the airport and we tooled around 15 miles from Champaign, then you need to realize to come back to the airport, you go south.
Right.
So it starts out very basic like that, and then we incorporate some of the instruments that tell you magnetic bearings to the field or to certain navigation aids, and we use sectionals, which is a VFR map that's very detailed. It's kind of a topographic map, but it has lots of metropolitan areas and roads and all these things that are drawn on it, and really it comes down to being able to see something on the ground and associate that with something on the map and say, okay, I'm here, so it's a right-hand turn to go
Sure.
back to the airport.
So there are left and right, north and south directions, even when you're flying an airplane.
Absolutely.
But one of the things I find when I'm flying as a passenger is very interesting is when you're flying over something and you're cognizant of, like, oh, that is that area, like that's St. Louis down there, it must be, we're going north to Champaign, but it looks very different from the air, and that's always disconcerting.
Yes.
Do pilots have the same, learning pilots have the same sort of
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that can obscure whatever it is you're trying to see. For example, if you go east towards Homer and St. Joe, when you're coming back to the airport, the U of I golf course is right along the east side of it, and it obscures a majority of the airport until you get right on top of it. So it's very common at the beginning for the airport to kind of sneak up on private pilots because you can't really see it until you get there. So we have things like distance measuring equipment, and we do terrain association with the map, and we try to find some spots along the ground to give you a hint that you're getting close. And it's a skill that you kind of have to practice and learn. But it does give you a different perspective being up that high and kind of having a slant range look down at the terrain. And really it's very enjoyable because it's a different perspective on life that you don't get to see.
Absolutely. Now, we also, in addition to actually putting a person in a plane and flying them around the country, we also have other instruments and tools that we use to simulate the flying experience. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of the Institute of using this equipment and what you're currently using?
Sure. We have simulators, or what are called flight training devices, that are manufactured at Frasca International in Urbana. And these are great tools for us to use because we can simulate emergencies that would not be safe at all to do in the
Right.
airplane. We can simulate electrical failures, engine failures, simulated fires. We don't actually set the simulator on fire, but we can simulate that. We can simulate loss procedures like Jim was talking about. And it gives us the opportunity to talk through the problem with the student. We can freeze the situation and say, okay, here's your situation that you're in. What steps do you need to take to get out of this and to solve the problem? You know, should you continue flying? Should you find the nearest airport and land? Do you need to talk to your passengers about this? Do you need to interface with air traffic control? How do you use all the resources that are around you to solve the problem that you find yourself in. And it's also good for instrument flying because we can position the airplane wherever we want it to be and give the student a problem to do, and they can repeat that same task over and over again. So if they're having problems, let's say intercepting a localizer, which is a navigation aid that takes you right to the runway, we can position them off the localizer multiple times and put them in that situation where they can learn that skill.
So have some of the advances in sort of graphics and 3D and I guess gaming industry in terms of representation of geographical terrain, have they helped to improve the simulators?
I think they've improved a great deal since I started to fly. The latest simulator that we got from Frasca is a Warrior FTD with a 180-degree visual display. And the visuals come from Google Earth. So when you're flying in the simulator, it looks like you're flying across Champaign County. And one of the ways that we've used this is to take our students who are learning navigation and help them practice that in the simulator so that they can learn how to pick out landmarks. You were talking before how the world is, the scale looks different from the air. So how do you determine, you know, the size of a town like Champaign versus Rantoul versus Tolono? You know, there's a definite difference in scale, and we kind of have to attune our eyes to see that the right way. And Jim was talking about landmarks in the local area. One of the biggest ones we use is the State Farm Center. That just shines from 15 miles away, and when the students can see that, you can immediately kind of orient yourself to where you are.
Very interesting. And of course you forget that the Earth is curved. It looks flat to us when we're on the ground, but when you're in the air you can see that curvature, which is always very interesting to me.
Well, at the altitudes we fly at, we don't usually see it
Not
too
that
much,
high,
but yeah.
Yes,
Right.
sure. Jim, talk a little bit about the transition from a learning pilot, a private pilot. We talked about using instruments. At what point do pilots begin to understand, like, you know, working with a tower, being passed from tower to tower, navigating cross country, and then where does that translate into, I'm going to go work for American or United and fly large planes?
Well, the first part of your question starts right away. We are a Class Charlie airport, which essentially means we have ATC on the field with us. So we have a control tower, we have a departure approach control, which is something you have to interface with every single day, multiple times. So right from the start, private pilot, first day, first flight, you're talking to tower control, ground control, approach and departure control. So that's something we teach from the very beginning. And it does take a little bit of time. I usually send students home and with a little homework assignment, and I'll have them pull up some archive ATC transition so that they can listen to it, because it's kind of it's almost like another language. There's a lot of jargon that you have to learn, phonetic alphabet just being one example. But it takes some practice, and feeling comfortable talking on the radio is something that some people struggle with just a little bit. But until you know what you're supposed to say and you know the sequence of events, it gets much better. Really, when you start thinking about going beyond being a private pilot and becoming a commercial pilot or an airline pilot, that's in the commercial course you really start to get into the intricacies of an airplane, the systems, down to the schematics, why we do things the way we do, why the plane flies aerodynamically the way it does, and you really get a sense of being a master of the airplane more than just an operator.
Well, we're going to take a short break here, but we're going to come back. We're going to actually talk to a current student, and we're going to talk a little bit about the opportunities that are available for students in Illinois, throughout the country, to come here to the Institute of Aviation at Parkland College and learn how to fly. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, my name is Ryan Heiser, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Fisher National Bank in Mahomet. I recently attended the AMA program at Parkland College, focusing on human resource development. For the past 10 years, I was a community bank loan officer, and the bank asked me to manage the Mahomet facility, and in turn, the board of directors encouraged me to, take some human resource training. So after some research, we found out that Parkland had the best program available. The instructor was my favorite part. Cindy was able to bring real-life experience into the classroom, and it was really advantageous for me to learn from somebody that's with that much experience.
Flying's always been on the family list. We've always looked at it. For many years, we've always looked at, what plane should we get as a family? But actually having the training has been in doubt because of the U of I cancellation of the program, and we're really excited to see that Parkland picked it up and makes it more available to me too.
It's different. I have to make sure I catch everything, don't miss anything. Mandy usually backs me up. Just if I miss something little, she'll catch it, but I got every little thing, making sure I did it right. A little bit nervous, wasn't sure what the landing was going to be like without someone to correct if I messed up, but it's exciting. Out here since the end of August, actually getting the training. I did my internship here in the spring, so I got a few flights before that. And then it's just been flying with Mandy for those previous 24 hours, just getting ready to do everything, practicing touch and goes. That was when she put me up in the 80s for the number of landings. And then the rest of the practice is going around doing maneuvers, stalls, slow flight, turns. My mom's parents live overseas, so we traveled over to see them, so we've been on a lot of big planes, and then I figured that'd be something fun to do, and my dad has lots of model aircraft, so we fly those too. So I started on that, and then I guess I worked my way up.
It's a good day to see that he's succeeding in something that's ahead of his dad, and knowing that in a couple years he'll be my instructor for when I get to go up and do this.
Well, welcome back to the Parkland Report, and that was a very interesting solo flight, a first solo flight at the Institute of Aviation, a Parkland College student learning to fly. And joining us now is Jeremy Russo. Thank you very much for being here, Jeremy.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me.
So you're an actual real-life student out there, so tell us a little bit about what it was that enticed you to be an airline pilot.
Well, I guess it could go back to when I was very young, about second or third grade. I think my mom still has the paper from class that I wrote about. The teacher asked, what do you want to be when you grow up, and kind of one of those questions. And if you could stay one age, what age would you stay? And I chose 28, and I said because I wanted to be an airline pilot and I'd be able to fly my family and friends. So she has that paper somewhere, I'm sure, on file. But I've always loved, just the sensation of flying and that whole thing from growing up young.
So how long have you been as a student?
Well, I started last semester, so now I'm finishing my private pilot's license in the 120 program, and also studying the 184 systems program right now.
And what was it about the Institute of Aviation that sort of attracted you?
Well, I was going to Illinois State University after I got out of the Marine Corps for a year, and then I wasn't too sure financially if I was going to be able to afford to do the program, even with my VA benefits. And the Parkland program here was local, and I was like, I'm going to go for it. And so I made the move, and I came over here and decided, hey, I'm going to go for it.
So Sybil, one of the things that we want to try to sort of explain to people is that it really is practical, and it is possible to do it. It's not something that's out of anybody's reach. Talk a little bit about the structured piece and how you go about recruiting students into the program.
We know that there's probably not enough students within the Parkland College district to support the program. So we've gone outside the district and really focused on the Chicago area where the population density is, and that's traditionally where a lot of our students have come from. So we go to a lot of college fairs and visit high schools. Our marketing department has targeted with search engine optimization techniques so that when people do a Google search for, aviation school in Illinois, we hope that Parkland College comes up first. So we're talking to people all over the state, all over the country. I'm going to be going to California at the end of April to go to a college fair there, because surprisingly we've had several students in the past come from Southern California to Illinois to learn how to fly. There's more room here.
Sure. Yeah. And Jim, is that something that's very interesting, like for students, in terms of like an opportunity to learn to fly in an airspace that is, for the most part, pretty safe, because we don't have mountains, and in the the East Central Illinois, we don't have a lot of like physical obstacles for them to run into?
Yeah, it is, and really this is a great place to do flight training because we don't have the terrain that you mentioned. It's very flat, but we get really hot weather, we get really cold weather, and there's always wind. I mean, anyone that lives in central
Sure.
Illinois knows that the wind's always blowing, and crosswind landings is something that people always struggle with. So our terrain is very easy to navigate, and there's fewer obstacles. But the airspace that we have is controlled, so even though it's simple terrain, we can do complex things within the airspace, but don't have to worry about obstacles as much.
And what you mentioned there about control is, I think, not a lot of people outside of the airline industry would understand like how the system of navigation works in terms of control towers, for example.
Right.
But we are a control space, which means we have a sanctioned FAA tower, which means that
Correct.
it is a very, very safe place to operate.
Yeah, essentially, in a nutshell, within a 10-mile radius around the airport, the controllers control all that airspace. So you have to have a clearance to go in and out because we have lots of instrument approaches, so you can fly in the clouds very, very low. They have to control that airspace.
Sure.
But that's really useful for us because we work hand in hand with the controllers all the time, so we can get experience doing those more complex instrument things, and it's very streamlined.
So Jeremy, what was it like when you first got into the plane and you realized you were actually going to be making something move?
Well, best thing I could probably compare it to is like when you're 16, first working on your driver's license. It's that feeling like now you have the license and you're out on your own. Well, my first solo, it was kind of like, well, now I'm out on my own, but I'm up in the air, so the instructor's not there to kind of correct you. But it was a very empowering feeling and awesome just to be like, hey, I'm doing this. I've applied all the things I've learned in the classroom, and now I'm doing it on my own.
So how much, part of it's a mechanical process, like you said, like learning to drive or operate a piece of machinery. What about sort of getting used to that notion that I'm not on terra firma, I'm actually in the air, and I'm moving and I'm changing direction, and it's not necessarily easy to see when I change direction which way I'm going. Was that disorienting for you at first a little bit?
I think so. Until you get to really know the instruments, at least at a basic level, and trusting what you see on those instruments, just like you do in your car with like your speedometer, your tachometer. Well, now you're putting in bank angles and everything else, as you turn. It's definitely, at first it's like, I'm not so sure, but as you get more confident in your skill level, as the instructors push you along, it definitely, becomes second nature as if you were driving your car.
So other than the physical, like sort of understanding of operation and so on, and getting used to that sort of piece, were you surprised at how quickly you were able to move through a level of both skill acquisition as well as a confidence level?
Sure. If you look at the syllabus, and then when you get the book from the bookstore, it's like, geez, I have to learn all of this information. And the FAA has a ton of things in its own with regulations. It's like, how am I going to digest all this? But my martial arts instructor used to tell me, you could eat a whole elephant one bite at a time.
Exactly.
So, and I kind of think that's what the instructors do. They really, between the ground and the air portion, put it together so you learn, and it's surprisingly quick that you kind of pick this up.
And so do you have now that you're sort of in the middle of it and you've already been flying and so on, does it seem like a very easy and logical process for you to continue on to fly through all the various different stages?
Sure. They definitely build on each other as you go along. And, it's something as you get into it, it's just the more and more you learn and you want to continue to learn, you kind of just feed on that, so you continue to grow.
And what are you hoping to aspire to do ultimately in terms of this, using this skill?
At this point, I've been talking to Sybil and all the instructors, just kind of networking, because I think everyone's idea is that airline pilot job, that they want to get to. But there's so many other opportunities out there. Honestly, I'd really like to give back to the veterans and things. Being a Marine myself, I'd like to start my own kind of charter service down the road where I could fly active duty service members, because it's always hard for them to get a flight anywhere when they're booking leave or whatever it is. So I'd like to kind of open something up for them down the road. So
It's a really interesting idea. One of the things, Sybil, that I follow everything more or less, but one of the interesting things about navigating airspace, whether or not we can come up with a different way to operate. And when you're looking at how airline industry works, we have a system that doesn't always appear logical to people because it's a hub-based system. And I'm flying to Colorado, but I first got to go to Atlanta, and then I fly to Colorado. And do you think that there are opportunities for sort of private development of entrepreneurial sort of ideas like Jeremy has about setting up a charter company, or do you think that the environment will prevent that from happening?
I think there are great opportunities for that, because when you go through the hub and spoke system like you just described, and add to that the time that you have to go through the TSA line, a lot of people, their time is very, very valuable, and they just don't want to have to deal with being at the airport 2 hours before the flight leaves. So I think there's great opportunities for charter and corporate airline services for those people who need to get to a meeting and get back and be very efficient in what they're doing.
So I was tossing this idea around with a friend a couple of months ago about the notion that you sort of would like, we have Uber in town now, this concept that if I want something, I want control of how I order it and when I get it delivered. And so we've become kind of more accustomed to shopping, for example, like that. We're talking about the idea about what if you could just sort of dial in, like, or log on and say, hey, I would like a flight to X on this day, and if there were 40 or 50 people who also wanted a flight that day, then a plane would magically appear and you would pay for it. Something like that possible, you think, in the future?
It could be possible. To be an air carrier, you have to be certified by the FAA as either, it's kind of complicated, but you're either scheduled or non-scheduled.
Sure.
So you can't have like an Uber plane, because then you're infringing upon other companies that have gone through this process to be certified for that. But there is a lot of talk about changing the aviation industry in the next 20 years with the use of UAS and drones and things like this. And they're going to have to become more flexible, because general aviation, is always changing, and there's always opportunities, and there could be big opportunities that could create thousands of jobs. So I think that there is a possibility to do that, but there's no mechanism to do it legally.
One of the things, though, that is probably likely is that we are going to need more pilots, because this current generation of pilots, many of whom were trained in the 70s and 80s and were military trained to a large extent, they're going to be retiring out of the U.S. airspace. But across the world now, you have an increasing number of people who are wanting to fly, are able to fly, want to be able to fly. There are more regional airports in my home country of Ireland now than ever existed when I was there, and more people flying directly from London to tiny airports in Ireland. So worldwide, there's going to be a need for us to train pilots.
Absolutely, yeah. The regional and commercial airline is really expanding in a lot of places in Africa, in Asia, Southeast Asia, and India, and it's growing. Just the global economy has made the access to commercial aviation more available to lots more people. So there's definitely growth all over the place.
So Jeremy, as you look ahead and you've got a great concept in your mind of something you would like to do, how close are you think, to realizing your dream?
Well, at this point, I'm focused on finishing up getting my private pilot's license by this summer. So I think by the end of April, beginning of May, it's definitely, I'll have that in the bag and then on to the next step.
So are you hoping to continue on at the Institute of Aviation then?
Most certainly. I love the environment, and it's just definitely been growing into a family as such. As this is a new program, I'm a new student. It just kind of seems like we're growing up together. I mean, I know a lot of the faculty members are from the old program through the University of Illinois, but this is certainly, new to me, and I just love being here, and I can't wait to continue to learn from them.
Well, Sybil, you're lucky to have such excellent students like Jeremy to come in, and wish you lots of luck in developing future students, and thank you all very much for being here this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of Parkland Report. We'll see you back here next time.